You ever see a courtroom so tense, it feels like even the marble's sweating? That's what it was like the day the Vatican dragged its shiny robes into a New York tribunal, thinking it could flex on a documentary filmmaker who'd been lighting them up on screen. What they didn't expect was that the judge waiting behind the bench was Elias Wynn, a man with one foot in law books and the other in something no one could quite put their finger on. They say Elias is weird, a hermit, talks to himself in Latin when he thinks no one's listening. Got kicked out of 3 country clubs and once held up a murder trial because he found a typo in a precedent from 1954. But that day he became the storm. Pope Francis walks in, not in disguise or behind glass, but real, breathing, aging holy man. Cameras popping like popcorn, crowd packed in shoulder to shoulder, whispering stuff like, "Can he even be here?" Or, "Is this legal?" Nobody knew. And that was the whole point. 4 minutes into this Pope's testimony, boom, Elias leans forward and says almost too casually, "Let me ask, under which statute does the Holy See claim standing within a secular international tribunal operating under U.S. constitutional frameworks?" Dead silence. The Vatican's lead counsel literally dropped his pen. Then came the unraveling. Elias didn't raise his voice. He didn't grandstand. He just dismantled them, piece by damn piece, quoting obscure clauses from treaties signed before World War II, citing loopholes in the Lateran Accords, and cross-referencing U.S. case law, like he had the whole Library of Congress downloaded into his bloodstream. The Pope's lawyers? They were scrambling like rats on a burning ship. One of them pulled out a laptop so fast it smacked his water bottle. Another tried whispering into an earpiece, only for Elias to call him out mid-sentence. "Mr. Torricelli, if you're speaking with someone not present in the courtroom, I'll have to consider that a procedural violation. Shall we address that now?" Boom, again. The whole vibe in the room shifted. This wasn't a lawsuit anymore. This was a reckoning. Elias started talking about sovereignty, like it was a magic trick no one understood but him. He raised questions about religious immunity, taxation, even the extradition status of church officials accused of decades-old crimes. And while he was doing that, the filmmakers, who the Vatican thought they could crush, just sat there, stunned, as their defense got turned into a holy inquisition, just not in the way the church expected. Then Elias did the unthinkable. He asked the Pope himself, "Your Holiness, do you believe any institution, sacred or secular, should exist outside the reach of law?" The translator hesitated. The Pope didn't. He looked Elias dead in the eye and said in perfect English, "No." Just one word, heavy as a cathedral bell. And just like that, it wasn't a trial anymore. It was a crossroads. Outside the courthouse, protesters had started gathering. Not just churchgoers or cinephiles, but law students, human rights activists, and people who'd never even heard of this case until Elias made them pay attention. Inside, the Vatican lawyers quietly filed a motion to adjourn. Elias granted it, with a smile that could have sliced stone. And Judge Wynn is done pretending it ever was. If part 1 shook the room, this one cracked the damn pillars. So here's the scene. It's day 2 in that marble echo chamber people used to call just a tribunal. But now? Nah. This was a holy battlefield, dressed in business suits and camera flashes. Outside, protesters and pilgrims bumped shoulders with law students and civil rights watchdogs. Inside, Judge Elias Wynn's courtroom has the buzz of a live wire dipped in water. Vatican Council shows up thinking yesterday was just a fluke, just a lucky punch from an eccentric judge. Maybe today, they'd get their groove back. Maybe Elias would walk it back a little, soften his edges. They were wrong. So wrong, it's embarrassing in hindsight. Wynn strolls in like he didn't just spark global headlines. Nods once at the room, then immediately starts slicing through their latest arguments like they're made of soggy parchment. "You come to my courtroom cloaked in holiness," he says, voice steady but sharp enough to shave with. But here, only the law has robes. Oof, that line hit like thunder. You could feel it in the air, like the ceiling itself. Pause to hear it. Vatican's late attorney, a silver fox type, who usually gets the hush when he enters a room, tries to pivot into a grand narrative about ecclesiastical sovereignty and divine mission. He even drops a Latin phrase or two, probably thinking he's speaking Elias's language. Wynne barely blinks. "Let's speak in the language of law," he says, and drops a bomb. Sealed motions. Yeah, motions nobody knew about. Motions the Vatican's legal team had quietly submitted months before the trial to suppress chunks of damning evidence. Stuff like internal communications between cardinals and a media conglomerate that just so happened to own distribution rights to the documentary they were suing over. Cute, right? Not so cute when Wynne starts reading snippets out loud. Emails, contracts, undisclosed payments. He doesn't raise his voice, doesn't get performative. He just exposes the rot with surgical calm, and every word slices deeper than the last. And then, get this, the Pope tries to speak. No translator, no attorneys leaning in, just the Pope himself, standing up like he's about to bring divine order to the chaos. But Elias, this man doesn't flinch, doesn't even fully turn to him, just levels the room with, "I respect your faith, but today, your church is the defendant, not the judge." Bruh. Even the court stenographer damn near dropped her keyboard. It wasn't disrespect. It wasn't rebellion. It was jurisdiction. A clean, ice-cold reminder that not even the Vatican gets a fast pass through the justice system. Not here, not today. The media outside goes nuclear. Hashtags start trending worldwide. Sash robes versus ritual. Mashar judging God's men. Shide Wynne v's Vatican people aren't just watching. They're picking sides. This isn't just some copyright spat anymore. This is about power. About how far reverence should stretch when it collides with truth. By the time court adjourns, Vatican lawyers look like they've aged 10 years. Wynne calmly rises, collects his notes, and exits like he just wrapped up a parking dispute. Not a historic cross-examination of the most powerful religious institution on earth, but the real kicker. As Elias steps out, someone overhears him mutter to a clerk, "Tell the bailiff to prep security. Tomorrow might get unholy." Yeah. Part 3's coming. And if today was revelation, tomorrow might be retribution. When a forgotten file rolls in and detonates the whole damn courtroom. So imagine this. The room's still buzzing from yesterday's mic drop moment, when Elias Wynne checked the Pope like he was just another defendant on a Tuesday. People barely slept. Reporters were camping out like it was Coachella for constitutional crises. The vibe? Tense. Like a thunderstorm was doing push-ups in the rafters. And then, the clerk rolls in with it. This tiny dude in squeaky loafers barely out of law school, wheels in a black case. Simple, dusty, and almost boring looking. Everyone's eyes bounce right past it, until Judge Wynne clears his throat. "That," he says, pointing with a lazy finger, "should have been reviewed 2 weeks ago. Why wasn't it?" You could hear a pin drop, and then maybe hear the Vatican's lawyer swallow it. Clerk stammers, says it was misfiled, tagged as evidence but never opened because of an incomplete chain of custody. Elias doesn't even blink, just leans forward, real slow, like a lion stretching before a kill. Then, let's complete the chain. Boom. Opens the briefcase right there. No fanfare, no drama, just a soft click. And hell opens quietly. Inside, a stack of documents so thick they're practically sweating. But these aren't just your everyday legal motions or archival fluff. Nah. These are classified correspondences, real ones. Vatican letterhead. International lobbying firms. Diplomatic postmarks. And dates that go back a decade. Elias flips through the first few pages. His brow furrows. Not in confusion, but recognition. Then, with calm only he could pull off, he starts reading one out loud. The letter details how the Vatican, through strategic influence campaigns, worked with international lobbyists to gently silence dissent. And by gently, I mean coordinated smear pieces, shadow audits, and sudden visa revocations for journalists who got too close to certain scandals. The kind of stuff that ruins lives without leaving fingerprints. By the time Wynne says the name of the first shutdown journalist, Cassandra DuPont, exiled from Spain after covering financial ties to the Holy See, the courtroom is no longer listening. It's buzzing. The Pope's advisors are practically vibrating, whispering like they're trying to pray the documents into non-existence. Wynne doesn't stop. He pulls out another letter, this one signed off by someone in the Pope's own inner circle, a cardinal, connected directly to the silencing of a Vatican whistleblower whose documentary footage mysteriously vanished after border authorities lost his equipment. The Pope's face goes pale. His mouth opens, but Elias cuts him off without looking up. "I will remind all present," Wynne says, flipping another page, "that moral authority is irrelevant in the absence of legal accountability." That line hit different. Gasps rip through the crowd. One journalist straight up stands up and says, "Oh my God." Another mutters, "They knew. They all knew." The Pope, stunned. Advisors are ghost white. One tries to lean in, whispers something in Latin, and Wynne dead-ass says, "We'll need that translated for the record." Petty? Nah, that's precision. And a reminder, this is his courtroom now. This isn't symbolic anymore. It's explosive. The Vatican's centuries-old wall of silence, it just got a hairline fracture, with a sledgehammer waiting in the wings. And the press? Forget headlines. They're crafting history in real time. As the court adjourns, Judge Wynne leans back, fingers steepled, eyes cold. Outside, thunder rolls across Manhattan like even the sky knows something sacred just snapped. And tomorrow, let's just say, the world's most secretive institution is about to learn what transparency really looks like. When the world's holiest man drops his guard. And it still ain't enough to stop the storm. You could feel the weight in the room before anyone said a damn thing. No buzz, no whispers. Just that heavy, air-thick kind of silence that means something is coming. The day started like the last few. A crowd outside so loud it could echo through history, and cameras stacked like dominoes in the back row. But nobody expected the next move to come from the man in white. Pope Francis sat there, ringed by legal advisors who looked like they hadn't slept since the briefcase bombshell the day before. That thing cracked open a decade's worth of secrets, and it had the whole Vatican side playing defense like they were 2 minutes from a Hail Mary interception. But then, Francis stood. No cue from his team. No whisper in his ear. He just rose with this slow, solemn weight, like the whole world was strapped to his shoulders, and he was ready to carry it anyway. "I request to address this court directly," he said. A collective inhale hit the room like wind slamming into stained glass. Even Elias Wynne, a man so unbothered he once corrected a prosecutor's grammar mid-trial, took a beat. Then he nodded. "Granted." And y'all, what happened next wasn't holy, wasn't rehearsed. It was human. Francis didn't dodge, didn't deflect. He didn't speak like a pope, cloaked in marble metaphors or saintly safe words. He spoke like a man, an old man, one who'd watched too much get buried under the church's gold-plated rug. He talked about pressure, about the machine behind the cross, about decisions made in whispers that twisted into policy. "I have spent years trying to change the culture of silence," he said. "But I must confess, we built that silence ourselves." That word, confess, hit different. His own legal team looked like they'd swallowed bricks. And then he dropped the line that no one in that courtroom, hell, maybe not even God himself, saw coming. "There have been crimes. There has been protection. And that protection ends today." Bruh. If the courtroom had a heartbeat, it skipped. Journalists froze. Spectators clutched each other. One Vatican attorney visibly mouthed, My God. And for once, even Elias didn't interrupt. Didn't scribble notes. He just stared, watching history do something it never had before. A sitting pope just confessed institutional wrongdoing. In open court, in America, and for about 20 seconds, there was nothing but silence. A deep, soul-level silence that made even the fluorescent lights seem scared to hum. Then, Elias Wynn, still seated, tilted forward, glasses low, eyes sharp, voice low and lethal. The confession was noble, he said. The consequences remain. Boom. The entire damn courthouse shivered, because what Elias was saying, respect the honesty, sure, but this ain't church. This is court. You don't get to pray your way out of punishment. Outside, the crowd went from reverent to riotous. Protest signs turned into breaking news alerts. Vatican officials tried to do damage control, but the horse had already galloped out of the stained glass stable. And Francis? He just sat down, not in defeat, but with the quiet grace of a man who knew what came next would shake foundations. And maybe that was the point. The game has changed. And tomorrow, judgment begins. Turns out, the real power was never the robe. It was the man wearing it the whole damn time. By now, the courtroom wasn't just packed. It was electric. You couldn't even breathe without feeling like the walls might lean in and listen. After 4 days of revelations, sealed files, a holy confession, and legal earth-shaking, the world tuned in live, holding their collective breath. Judge Elias Wynn, chaotic, brilliant, low-key terrifying, sat silent behind his bench as the clock hit noon. Everyone knew a ruling was coming. What they didn't know was how far it would go. He began with a whisper, no dramatics, just power in its rawest form. In the matter of the Holy See for Salgado, he said, this court finds in favor of the defendant. And just like that, boom, instant media detonation. Instant. The Vatican, Winch continued, initiated this lawsuit under the pretense of defamation and intellectual property violation. In reality, it was a targeted attempt to suppress free speech, journalistic inquiry, and international press protections under both U.S. and global law. You could practically hear 1,000 journalists screaming into their recorders at once. He wasn't done. This trial revealed a sustained campaign of influence, coercion, and intimidation, coordinated not just through spiritual channels, but corporate, political, and covert financial networks. This court cannot and will not be used to protect sacred institutions from secular scrutiny. Every Vatican lawyer checked, muzzled, imploded. The defendant, Salgado, the doc filmmaker, sat frozen, tears in her eyes. And the Pope? He didn't flinch. He just watched, hands clasped, waiting. Then came the turn no one saw coming. Wynn leaned back, took off his glasses with a tired kind of finality, and stood. Not in anger, not in arrogance, just done. He stepped down from the bench. Before this court adjourns, he said, there is something I must say, not as a judge, but as a man who once stood on the edge of a very different life. Now, the room really hushed, like end-of-the-world silent. He told them quietly that decades ago, he was offered a position by the Vatican, legal consultant, private halls, global influence. But he turned it down, not because he didn't want the power, but because he feared it would cage him. I saw a machine, he said, too sacred to question, and too vast to navigate without losing myself. People thought Wynn was a relic, a crank, a footnote in a courtroom that was supposed to be procedural theater. Turns out he was a ghost in the machine, a legal titan hiding in plain sight. Under different names, he'd been helping shape international law, pushing civil rights legislation in countries where saying the wrong thing could get you disappeared. A shadow scholar, an architect of justice. Under a dozen pseudonyms, Elias Wynn had been everywhere, and nobody ever knew. The room rippled. Someone gasped audibly. Another started clapping, then stopped, like they weren't sure if this was real life. And then, in the most cinematic moment to ever go down in a courtroom with live stream captions, the Pope stood. He didn't say much, didn't preach or invoke scripture. He just nodded slowly and said, "You are not a judge, you are a reckoning." And for once, everyone agreed. Wynne left the courtroom without his robe, just a man again. A man who turned down power to keep his voice. And when the cameras tried to follow, he raised one hand, not to wave, but to stop them cold. Because this wasn't about him anymore. It was about the fire he lit. And next, that fire's gonna burn through every cathedral of silence left. When the fire fades, but the heat lingers in every sacred hallway and every dusty courtroom. History didn't wait for the ink to dry. The second Elias Wynne's gavel hit wood for the last time, something shifted. Not just in that packed Manhattan courthouse, but around the entire globe. You could almost feel borders ripple. Vatican spokespeople scrambled. Bishops blinked under press lights. And every law school professor on the planet suddenly had to rewrite half their lecture notes. They called it a trial. But really, it was a seismic event with subpoenas. Within 48 hours, parliaments from Italy to Argentina were calling emergency sessions to revisit religious immunity clauses. International courts started re-examining what the phrase "above reproach" had cost us. And suddenly, whole nations had to answer one question they'd dodged for centuries. What do you do when divinity hides behind legal armor? That ruling, the one Wynne handed down with the calmness of a chess master and the finality of thunder, started making the rounds in law schools like gospel. Not just quoted, worshipped. They named it the doctrine of secular equality, clean, bold, groundbreaking. A legal stance that finally said, no matter how holy your title is, you still bleed under the Constitution. No gilded chapel, no sacred handshake, no whispered immunity in marble corridors. Just truth and law, and the fragile, brutal clarity of justice when it's actually done right. And when he dipped. Didn't take interviews, didn't sell a book, didn't even drop a TED Talk. 1 week after the ruling, a student from NYU spotted him riding the 6 train, reading a newspaper and sipping a bodega coffee. Same tweed jacket, same scuffed shoes. Like he hadn't just body-checked one of the oldest power structures in human history. He never spoke about the trial again. He didn't need to. His silence was the period at the end of a legacy. But the world? The world couldn't shut up. In Rome, Pope Francis stood before a hall of cardinals, every robe in the place stiff with tension, and did something almost no one expected. He owned it. All of it. No spin. No damage control masquerading as grace. He didn't just apologize. He launched what reporters started calling the Crusade of Clarity. Files were declassified. Meetings once shrouded in Latin whispers were now streamed live. Bishops who once operated like mafia dons got stripped of titles in public, with receipts. And somewhere under the golden ceilings of the Vatican, a new department quietly opened. The Office of Internal Reckoning. For the first time in centuries, the Church wasn't just preaching transparency. It was choking on it and learning to breathe. Outside the courtroom, weeks later, the plaza still pulsed. The crowd had thinned, but not faded. Street artists started painting Judge Wynne's words on murals in Queens. In Mexico City, a cafe named itself Doctrine and Espresso. In Nairobi, a protester held a cardboard sign during a clergy investigation that read, "The robe humbled the mitre, and truth wore both." Goddamn, Elias Wynne didn't tear down faith. He tore down fear. The fear of questioning power. The fear of looking sacred authority in the eye and saying, "Not here, not anymore." And while the world spun forward, a legend quietly settled into place. Not carved in stone or whispered in pews, but scrawled in case law and tattooed in memory. This wasn't the end of a trial. This was the beginning of accountability. For everyone. And somewhere, in a quiet corner of the city, Elias Wynne poured another cup of coffee, flipped open the paper, and read about a small village in Eastern Europe that had just reopened an investigation into its most powerful priest. He smiled, sipped, and vanished back into the noise. "Wanna go one more round? I can give you an epilogue that pulls the curtain all the way back, show how the shadows really move when power starts to bleed."